I hope and trust that your morning was enjoyable. My name is Scott St. Louis. I'm with the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies right here at Grand Valley State University. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you this afternoon our keynote speaker, Dr. John Wunder. If I remember correctly, his presentation today is entitled Mapping Out Midwestern Studies. But before he begins, it's a privilege of mine to map out his many accomplishments across a wide array of scholarly fields and institutions. Dr. Wunder received his bachelor's, master's, and law degrees in his home state from the University of Iowa before earning his PhD in history from the University of Washington. He has held faculty positions at Case Western Reserve University, Texas Tech, Clemson, and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He's also held visiting positions and fellowships at Lewis and Clark College, Columbia University, the Australian National University, and the University of Mexico. Dr. Wunder also served as Bicentennial Chair in North American Studies on a Fulbright professorship at the University of Helsinki in Finland. Currently a Professor Emeritus of History at Nebraska, he served as Director of the Center for Great Plains Studies there for a number of years. In 2009 and 2010, he also served as 49th President of the Midwestern History Association. The recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Organization of Native American Scholars, Dr. Wunder has received grants and fellowships from such prestigious organizations as the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Library of Congress, the Rockefeller Foundation, and many others. As author or co-author of 4 book monographs and dozens of journal articles and anthology chapters, and as advisor to nearly 70 doctoral and master's thesis projects, Dr. Wunder has made significant contributions to our understanding of American history in a variety of contexts. Please help me give a warm Midwestern welcome to a distinguished guest of the Hauenstein Center and friend of the MHA, Dr. John Wunder.
Thank you, Scott. Can you hear me? Thank you for your kind reception, and especially the introduction of which was very thorough, I must say. And a special major thanks to John Lauk and Joe Hogan for the invitation to address you today. What I would like to do is tell you a few stories which I think you should perceive as challenges and discuss infrastructure for a budding organization such as Midwestern Studies. In 1999, I was one of 25 academics invited by Bill Ferris, then director of the NEH, to Washington, D.C. to help plan an initiative to create 10 regional humanities centers. The gathering began with Chairman Ferris asking us what we thought of this regional humanities concept and directive. After a few of us attempted to address the issue, a very noted and prominent human geographer from the University of Wisconsin startled many of us by boldly declaring that there are no regions in the United States, that there is locality and then there is nationality. My initial reaction was that it was perhaps severe toilet training on his part. But I restrained myself in thereby showing my own severe toilet training. There was silence in the room, and finally I piped up and stated that I believe that regions in the United States defined our nation. I really believe that. And that when I moved in my career from Iowa in the Midwest to Washington State and then to Ohio, and then to West Texas. All this has been documented. And the mountains of South Carolina, and finally back to the plains of Nebraska, that I had indeed lived in many regions of which the climate and customs and land differed greatly. Together, they constituted the diverse and greatness of the American experience. Indeed, I intoned, regions are the most important way to explain America. Another silence followed, and then many of my fellow invitees came forward and agreed with me, and not the non-regionalists. Then Chairman Ferris asked how we might break down a map of the United States into a map of 10 regions. And that's a pretty interesting question, don't you think? And after another pause, I admitted out loud that I had scribbled such a map on a napkin on my plane coming to DC from Nebraska. Immediately, an NEH assistant came to me and requested the napkin. And off the document went, this is an original source, folks. Off the document went to a Xerox machine, and it was returned to everyone in the room. Now, in the interim, I told folks that I had started in the Pacific and moved east, which was already a revolutionary concept, and that all the while preserving the 6-state New England region. And so was born the Regional Humanities Directive that was to provide a $20 million endowment for each of the 10 humanities centers. In our Midwest, there were 3 divisions: the Upper Mississippi Valley, the Central, and the Plains. Within these regions, a competition was organized, and after proposals for a regional humanities center were made and evaluated, the University of Wisconsin, ironically, Ohio University, and the University of Nebraska were named as hosts of a potential regional center. Together with the late Sue Rosowski, a Willa Cather scholar at Nebraska, we wrote the Nebraska proposal in concert with North Dakota State University, including the Plains region included North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma. And we were awarded the promise of funding. The terms of the agreement required NEH to provide $5 million, and we were to raise $15 million. Think of what you could do with $20 million, folks. We had many, many dreams. Hence the $20 million endowment, and within 2 months, we had achieved full funding of our $15 million. And we had received notice from NEH that our endowment was approved. But funding from NEH was to be forthcoming, and our $15 million was dependent on the NEH full funding, of which we assumed would be available in the near future. However, at this point, a number of Eastern elite foundations began to object to the entire humanities center concept. How could there be anything worthwhile, they asked, in the humanities west of the Hudson River? Their Ivy leaders asked these questions often, and various foundations passed resolutions, and organizations began an intensive lobbying effort to prevent regional humanities centers from being funded by NEH. The story doesn't end well. That's why I want you to think in terms of challenges. A presidential election intervened, and of course we know what that's like. And George Bush became president. He appointed a new NEH chairman, an art historian from the University of Indiana. And the new NEH leader announced that the regional humanities centers were not going to be fully funded, nor were they to be encouraged. We were informed we would only receive around $700,000 of the $5 million promised. And as a result of that, we lost $15 million that we had raised that was to be matched by the $5 million. We were astounded and greatly saddened. It's not often that a $20 million humanities endowment is snatched away. But it happened to us and to many others in the country that had been out working hard to do good things. However, the Great Plains Center, where I was, at the University of Nebraska, continues to pursue its programming and successful regional activities, unlike some of the other NEH-declared regional centers. Indeed, the Center for Great Plains Studies is the oldest and the largest interdisciplinary center in the United States, and it just celebrated its 40th birthday. But let us not dwell on a lost opportunity. Part of this mapping talk will involve suggested actions and directions for the Midwestern History Association. In part, these suggestions will be based on what we have tried successfully and not successfully. Others will come from my thoughts and experiences and from many of my colleagues. So let's get to the mapping. First, an interlude. In November of 2003, 150 scholars gathered in Lincoln, Nebraska to explore a conference theme of, quote, regionalism and the humanities. Many talks and papers were given, and out of them was published a book by the University of Nebraska Press called Regionalism and the Humanities, edited by Tim Mahoney, my colleague and historian, and Wendy Katz, an American art historian. And I'm going to pass this book around. I've got someone to do it. It's a very interesting work that hasn't gotten enough play, in my opinion. Among the many interesting essays are those embracing the Midwest, dwelling within the place we're seeking, the Midwest regional identity and internal histories by Jeanette Alley. Regionalism and the Realities of Naming by Steve Barrett, who's a literature professor. The Midwest as a Colony, Transnational Regionalism by Edward Watts. That sort of strikes my eye. Transcending the Urban-Rural Divide, Willa Cather's Thea Kronberg Goes to Chicago. I think that's less interesting. I've read Thea Kronberg. And Imagining Place, Nebraska Territory, 1854 to 1867. I'd like to be associated with what editors Mahoney and Katz have written. Quote, the ongoing erosion of space and place as factors in identity formation of modern life has given regionalism its continuing impetus, indeed its renewed urgency and vitality. In some ways, in a shrinking global life connected by instant communications and integrated into an international economy, one's sense of place or the role of one's geographic location on one's sense of identity may seem a matter less than ever before in terms of ideas, news, and production and exchange of goods and services, unquote. The editors further advise us, quote, amid perceived sameness, region and place have come to matter even more for many people as they struggle to hold on to that which makes them distinct. Together, they represent some of the most innovative and intriguing explorations of the history and contemporary value of regionalism in humanistic investigation, unquote. This, I submit, is why we need to re-emphasize, redefine, and rediscover the Midwest. How might we do that? I suggest that the MHA think about ways to build a strong infrastructure. It has already begun to do so, and it has accomplished so much in such a short time. Such an infrastructure, I submit, needs a definition tied to broad themes and must involve permanent connections to natural related constituents. These constituents include K-12 teachers and curriculums, state humanities councils, state education agencies and state legislatures, university presses, state historical societies, educational television stations, and Midwestern foundations. And there are probably more. Let's ponder this list. First, I have been giving some thought to defining the Midwest, not in terms of specific states, but in terms of what influences the people of this land. The Great Plains Center defines itself as concerning environment and culture. And that has been a guiding dualism that has served it well, particularly in terms of its journals, conferences, publications, and fundraising. Thus, the MHA might look to some major themes around which to organize. For me, and I was astounded to see this in your program shortly to be heard, for me, one compelling theme that influenced virtually all developments in the Midwest, immigration, transportation, settlement, and on, is water. Think of the Mesopotamia-like intersection of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. Actually, Jefferson mapped the original Northwest Territories using a number of ancient terms to name the proposed new states. He was a practical man, so one of the states was to be called Washington. There is also the Great Lakes that bind the region wherever people lived. There was significant water. The Midwest borderlands even involved water in significant ways. Think of the Missouri River or the connectors of the Great Lakes. I think one should embrace one's place intellectually. And water provides a timeless understanding as to what it means to be a Midwesterner. And of course, there are other themes that might provide similar geographic and cultural connections. But I think water is an especially strong one. Number two, one of the problems for regenerating interest in Midwestern history is the fact that the teaching of the history of the Midwest and of Midwest states and regional history is in such short supply. State education agencies need to be encouraged to reconsider requiring state or regional history in middle school or high school curricula. At the same time, universities and colleges need to be reminded to offer and to require for educational social studies certification courses on state and/or regional history. Over the years, higher education has not kept up with the retirements of regional specialists. This weakens the education of teachers as well as other majors. History departments are in part to blame when they decide to let a regional or state historian position go or to shift to another topic of expertise. Think about where the best specialists on Midwestern history are trained. Can MAs or PhDs be obtained in Midwestern state histories at the top universities in the region? Can we study Minnesota history at the University of Minnesota? Illinois history at the University of Chicago? Wouldn't that be amazing? Indiana history at Notre Dame University? Michigan history at the University of Michigan? I could go on and on here, but it is time to attack these fundamental intellectual weaknesses. Perhaps the first step is to compile a census of the Midwest colleges and universities where state or regional history is offered to undergraduate and graduate students, and which states require state history in their educational curricula. How might the MHA help here? By creating curricula for middle school and high school teachers is a start. At the University of Nebraska, I taught a course for many years that combined Great Plains history with Nebraska state history. Prior to my teaching this course, these were offered as two separate courses, but I discovered that teaching two separate classes prevented me from teaching graduate seminars on the topic. And so I combined these, and in that process, found out that the state colleges were already teaching Nebraska and the Great Plains history combined to undergraduates. Perhaps that is what you do. Perhaps that is what your home university does. But more need to be encouraged to do that. Then the State Board of Nebraska decided to require regional and state history of its social studies teachers. Of course, nothing is permanent, and so one must protect these fundamentals, this infrastructure, if you'll allow me to use that term. Here, too, is a role for the MHA, making sure state agencies not only make these moves, but keep them. Moreover, contact with state legislators is important. Find out who are teachers in the legislature and whether there is a tradition of mandating regional or state history in school curriculums. In essence, what I'm suggesting to you, it is lobbying time. Number 3. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, contact should be made with university presses, state historical societies, and state educational television stations. The Midwest has a number of presses that do very accomplished work and have kept going state and regional history series. Illinois Press, Indiana Press, Nebraska Press, South Dakota Historical Society Press, Minnesota State Historical Society Press come to mind. All the states have university presses, and they publish a variety of specialties that do not always include state and regional history. But I suggest get involved in a state history series. Make a pitch to interested editors. The same holds true for the excellent historical societies and their libraries in the Midwest. How might the MHA partner with these valuable agencies? The Midwest has some of the top historical societies in the country. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, they all come to my mind. They are leaders and have ongoing excellent programs. It's important to include them on your committees and encourage membership from their staffs. And the same holds true for educational TVs. I have worked with several ETVs, and it has resulted in several successful endeavors. A number of ETVs do documentaries, get involved, and I felt that one should get involved with these filmmakers and get them involved with MHA activities. And fourth, my last infrastructure suggestion. Think big and think foundations. Think Gates Foundation. Think Buffett Foundation. We always think of Buffett Foundation in Nebraska. I'm sure you can imagine many more. Have conversations with their directors and have in mind some major projects that will involve history and the Midwest region. Encourage leadership by these foundations in local and regional history. Maybe it might sponsor a number of biographies for young or adult readers, or a major curriculum drive that might involve teachers from all over your state. Here in the Great Plains, Chautauqua is still sponsored by the Humanities Councils of Nebraska and Kansas. A foundation might enjoy sponsoring such local, invigorating events. Above all, run with your imagination, and I believe those foundations will be very interested. So there is my map for you. I hope it is useful. It is incomplete, but there are plenty of places for you to add to it or alter it. You have been a most attentive audience, and I thank you. I wish you well in your important endeavor, that of building the MHA and restoring the Midwest region to an important and significant role in the history of our country. Thank you. Now I think we have time for questions, and I'm going to move around a little. I have to tell you, the journey to Grand Rapids was not an easy one. We arrived after starting at 9 a.m. in the morning yesterday, at 2 a.m. today. So I'm a little, I don't know what. I think someone that said they were going to give me a beer tonight. I don't know whether that would be good. So questions, and I'd like to encourage you to use the microphones up front, but if not, yell them out so people can hear and I can hear. Yes, sir.
Could you tell us what the states were that were included in the region that Nebraska was going to be the head of? And with 10 regions, I know that there was some controversy about the artificiality of the areas encompassing these 10 regions.
You're just mouthing the Eastern elitists. I'm teasing you, of course. The Nebraska group was 5 states. All of them were 5 states except for one group, which was 4 states because New England had to be 6 states. And, and so it was North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma. It was that tier, all those states that voted for Bernie Sanders. I'm just teasing you. I know we're in Bernie Sanders country. So that was them, and I don't think it was us. There were some weird combinations, but they were pretty much adjacent. I mean, we had to find places for Guam, my God. And the Virgin Islands, and you know, America is very diverse. And so that's what was decided, and people ran with it. I know that the upper Mississippi Valley included a number of states that didn't usually think of themselves as neighbors with these other states. And, but you know, they all got together and they went after it. So, and of course in the South there were several groups, and the West was complicated because of Hawaii and Alaska, and I think they were put with Washington, Oregon, and California, which made some sense, kind of a Pacific theme. And then there was, of course, the islands and the further out. But that was what was done. I think the only region that had 4 was a kind of desert theme region: Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. But it's been a while. Another question? Yes?
What were the criteria for organizing the states beyond geography?
What did she say?
What were the criteria for organizing the states beyond geography?
I think the criteria was a high criteria was logical ways in which to organize people to meet and to communicate, and we didn't take into consideration too many other factors. And so there was a desire to try and not frame how groups would want to see themselves and define themselves. And they all went and tried to do that. And a number of them were quite successful in doing that. But your point is well taken. Yes, sir.
Professor Wunder, could you tell us what you think the reaction would be by university administrators or history departments to a proposal to start a Midwestern Studies emphasis in a department, say at the University of Nebraska? What do you think the reception would be among the academics?
Well, at the University of Nebraska, when they started the Great Plains Center, very early on created a Great Plains major. And the reason, and that was quite successful. The reason why that started that way was a dean in arts and sciences that really invested in the initiative. At the same time, there were about 40 individuals who represented very illustrious scholars in the state, in the university. And these scholars very much enjoyed the community that built up in the process of discussing this activity. And they very much were committed to it. So there were botanists and biologists along with musicians and historians, sociologists, geographers, all these, and then artists and all of that got together and found that, I will learn a lot from this experience, and it will enhance the things that I am interested in my discipline, as well as provide interdisciplinary kinds of activities. Let me tell you of our experience when we did the Great Plains Encyclopedia. There were about 120 fellows at that point in the center. Now there are 200. And we sent out an invitation to everybody who was a fellow to come meet on a Saturday to talk about how we could do a Great Plains Encyclopedia. And so in the morning, we had the humanities folks and the art folks. And in the afternoon, we had the scientists and the social scientists. And in the morning, the humanities folks were all very plugged in and thought it was a great idea, and they had a number of specific suggestions. But the art people were having a real problem with the concept of regional art. Perhaps you've had those conversations with your artist friends. Some think that that is very much a viable activity. Others think if it's not national, it's not worthy of being art. And that debate fueled some of that. And then in the afternoon, we had an interesting development in that the scientists, who were now used to getting together to go after those big hungry grants that university administrators want, and they understood how a biologist could work with other people. And at the same time, the social scientists really had trouble because many of them, especially the psychologists, did not think there was a regional psychology. Now, I think they have a point in some ways, but I really know when I meet someone new whether or not they're a Midwesterner. I can just tell. Can't you? And usually the first thing a Midwesterner asks is, well, where are you from? Right? And I would ask my students in class, well, where are you from? And they would say, why is he asking that question? But I said, that's how I can develop a means of communication with you. So if one person said, well, I'm from Dysart, Iowa, which is a town of 800, which is where I was from, that would have been amazing. But if somebody was from Gladbrook, I would say, oh, well, I know the pool hall owner in Gladbrook. You know him? Well, his daughter was a state championship basketball player. Well, these are the kind of connections that I think are so important. And Midwesterners, more than any other region, and I've lived in virtually every region but New England, and my daughter has lived there, most Midwesterners start conversations with new people trying to figure out how each one fits together. And I think that that's very important. I think I've gone aside somewhere. But the encyclopedia came out and it did very well, and it was a mutual project. Most of the people on the Saturday were very enthusiastic, and out of what did I say, 120 fellows, 85 participated. Now, how many of your faculty colleagues would give up a Saturday to talk with others about something like this kind of project? Well, that's the kind of building, I suggest, can be done, and it's very satisfying to everyone involved. I hope I answered that. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Professor Wunder, thank you for this great discussion. Sorry. Thank you for this wonderful talk. As somebody who is presenting on St. Louis and its place in the Midwest, St. Louis, Missouri, I was wondering just where you place Missouri in the Midwest or within sort of American geography, because I've had a difficult time, and that's kind of what I'm trying to.
Do you want my flippant Missouri answer? It's not, because it's a slave state.
And what's your non-flippant answer?
It's not a Midwestern state.
Why?
I'd say portions of Missouri, I'd say they're borderland Midwest. The portions of the northeast and northwest parts, but the majority of Missouri, I would say, is not. And its culture is closer to Southern culture than it is to Midwestern culture. That's just one person's opinion, and maybe I've got it all wrong, but maybe you'll help us to understand that. But Missouri is a challenge, in my view, just as I would call Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, and North Dakota borderland, Midwestern places. And pretty much their Midwestern connections came via the railroad and other economic activities that brought them together with the Midwestern core, should we call it that. Another thing that I would suggest, if one were to get into the business of Midwestern borderlands, I think that has a lot of opportunity, because I think spilling over into Ontario and Canada would be very nice to add to the Midwest studies. I think there's a lot of possibilities there historically, and I would urge you to think about that as well. Do you think of Pennsylvania as Midwestern? I'm afraid I don't, but there's probably a little bit of Pennsylvania that's related significantly to Ohio and I suppose Michigan, that you could see it as a borderland area. But I really do think that there is a core to the Midwest, and those cultures and values that come out of that are distinctive, in my opinion. Now, my opinion could be completely wrong. How are we doing? Oh, we still have some time. Yes, sir.
I'll ask a question and I'll use the microphone.
Please do.
I was intrigued by your reference to Bill Gates and asking and thinking big.
Yes.
And asking for the Gates Foundation, because Bill Gates, as I understand him, is an advocate and supporter of big history, which seems the polar opposite of what you're doing, because it's the cosmos from the beginning,
Yeah.
Big Bang till the whole end of thing. So on one hand, have you thought or known about anybody who's approached some of the kind of computer digital era mega billionaires successfully? But also this kind of touches on a question that came up this morning at the plenary about your opinion and the relationship between the new age of social media and Web 2.0 and the digital revolution and regional identity and culture and things like that.
Okay. I'll have to cushion myself on this. I'm not very good with technology. After all, I'm a 71-year-old historian, and I typed my dissertation. And it was an ordeal. So I've adjusted to technology, but as soon as I would adjust to one thing, it would be gone. It would be like it's not happening anymore. I like to show some films in my classes, and then the VCRs all went away. It's kind of like the cars that I buy. They usually go out of print rapidly. At any rate, that's why I'm cushioning myself. I think digital activity is a wonderful advancement of technology. I don't think it advances history. I could be wrong on that. I don't see it in creative, intellectual activity. Now, I know I have had a number of former colleagues who were real into that in a big way, but I'm a little suspicious of it. But wouldn't you expect an old historian to be that way? I think that that it's important to. I'm of a view that one must go to the place that you write about. I think you need to get a sense of the culture of the place that you're writing about. And I think that digital studies are very antiseptic. And I don't think you get the humanity part of it. It becomes an exercise in technology rather than an exercise in humanity. But there probably are many of you who could argue just the opposite, and I respect you for that. But that's kind of where I am with that. At one time, I thought it was kind of we have this problem at Nebraska with our main academic library that has decided that it really doesn't want to buy any more books. It wants everything online. Gone will be browsing the stacks and discovering, my God, that long-lost resource that you really needed. That's gone. And they've moved many of the books to a storage facility. And then, like many other Big Ten institutions, they have decided, well, they don't have enough students in the library. And so they put in a donut shop where the books used to be. And they think that's really going to help bring in business. Well, maybe it will. It may not be the business they want, but so the joke around on campus is they care more about donuts than books. So we've been harassing them fiercely, the historians have been. But those are trends that are going on all over the country, and I'm sorry to see that, because there are certain kinds of humanistic aspects to a library that I think are highly valuable. But, time charges on, and we have new directions to go. But it doesn't mean that we have to accept them all. Is it time?
It looks like we are all set.
Thank you so much.
Join me.